Hi there, welcome to Antidote, where you get science-backed wisdom for real life. Today I want to talk about exams and studies. I think this is something that at one point or another in most people's lives has caused us stress, because it's one of the only times in our lives where our abilities in something is measured, quantifiably assessed, and then boiled down to a single letter or number. And not only this, obviously our career prospects, um, whether or not we can access higher education, is also directly tied to how well we do at school. So therefore, it seems like the emotional weight that we place on academic performance makes complete sense. So you would think logically, okay, to do as well as possible in this, I need to remind myself constantly how important it is, and also to lock yourself in a room, work like a dog for months on end, and constantly have your eye on the goal of I need to knock this out of the park. And it's true, if you don't have aims, you don't have motivation, you are likely going to drop out or fail. But how many of us who really do care about how well we do watch ourselves self sabotage, procrastinate, and then by the time it gets close to our exams or to handing an assignment, we feel burnout or unproductive and we haven't really performed as best as we want. Um, so in this video, we'll look at why attaching your sense of self-worth to your academic performance is actually detrimental to not only your performance, but your mental health. So we'll look at ways to go about studying that means you can perform your best while you're keeping your marbles. Now, there's a distinct difference between being motivated and having aims for your performance, but then tying your sense of personal value to it, and also your worth as a person to how well you do in school. In psychology, there's actually a term for people who attach their self worth to academic performance. It's called people with high academic contingent self worth. And the problem with this is while you're studying, your self esteem can fluctuate really wildly. So it's either built up and boosted by good results, or it's completely decimated and destroyed by disappointments. So where does this come from? So it's often caused unconsciously when we're a lot younger. When we're that young, we absorb messages from people whose opinions we value. So that's authority figures, that's teachers, parents, but then also your peers, friends, people at your age at school. Because when we're that young, we are essentially just sponges, and our view of the world and what's important and how we kind of relate to ourselves is often based off messages we absorb from these types of people and the external world. And when we're kids, our parents' attention is basically like our form of currency. It's how we kind of feel good about ourselves. So if they praise us for doing well in a test when we're young, that might inadvertently teach us that, oh, to get my parents' attention, I need to do well in school. I get praised when I do well. And conversely, if you don't perform well and then you get negative attention, criticism from your parents, I get criticized when I do badly. And this can lead to, forming an attachment to how you feel about yourself based on how you're doing in school. Now, the upside of having your self worth tied to your grades is that it does serve as an excellent initial motivation to crack the books out and start working hard. So when you feel like the stakes are that high, that how good or not I am as a person depends on how well I do in these tests or whatever, it could that level of pressure, it makes you take immediate action. So these types of people, they're often the first to open the books, draw up a really detailed timetable, and start thinking about exams and tests early. But the problem with it is it's a really quick burning, unreliable fuel, and it that sense of constant pressure of needing to do well to protect and validate your ego, it leads to a really volatile emotional state. Because if your mood is highly sensitive to how well you do, um, it's basically like living on a roller coaster. When you do well, you're up here and everything's great, and the second you don't live up to your expectations, you're really down and everything feels like it's lost. And it's not even like this emotional turmoil and this stress has any sort of real payoff in terms of academic performance, because it creates a high level of anxiety and burnout. And when we're anxious, it makes it really difficult to study. This is shown in countless studies. Um, Anxiety impacts concentration, working memory, and complex thought. And these are all things that you need in order to do your best and to study effectively. Just from my personal perspective, when I'm really anxious about, a test or an assignment, it actually distracts me and it stops me getting in the flow state, which is where I want to be ideally. I want to be in that flow state where the outside world's kind of locked off from me and I'm really focused on it's just me and this piece of work or this test. And that's when I, perform my best. And I can't really do that when I'm really stressed and anxious. So the key thing to bear in mind is that having high academic contingent self-worth makes failure, or even the idea of failure, seem like an earth-shattering calamity and a devastating blow to how you feel about yourself. But that's not actually the reality of the situation. For most people who aren't like complete off-the-scale Mensa geniuses, learning is a trial and error process. Studying is very much a trial and error process. And actually achieving a grade that's not what you wanted it to be is a really good opportunity to kind of look up what you need to do better. Maybe your study routines, maybe it's just your technique in the way you wrote an essay, or maybe it's just an area of knowledge that you need to, work on, which, until you get your final grade, these are all things that you can choose to work on and to learn from. And you will see the fruits of that effort if you put that effort in. And the thing is, teachers and university professors, they'll give you very, very detailed assessments of your work, often with comments about how to improve it or areas where you're lacking. And this is basically giving you the roadmap for future success. So why do so many of us not take that and run with it? Why do so many of us kind of get defensive and maybe even dismissive of the person who's marking our work and kind of turn a blind eye to it and think, well, what I'm doing is actually fine. It's actually a problem with the institution or the marker who's graded your work, which, that's a very childish reaction. But if you think about it, makes complete sense because it's coming from the place of a hurt child, right? It's the child within us who's internalized the message that we're only worthy if we live up to our expectations and we perform how we expect ourselves to perform. And when we don't achieve that, it's a real threat to our ego. And we feel that, pain as a young kid who got criticized by a teacher or a parent or, got praised. And then they feel like, well, if I don't perform that way, that praise is going to go away. And these are all things that unconsciously, even when we become adolescents and then even adults going into higher education, these are all things that could unconsciously influence how we feel about school and university. Because blaming these sorts of things, it helps us to avoid the really painful feeling that can come from feeling like, well, we tried our best and it's just our own intrinsic shortcomings or fundamental lack of ability, which can devastate our self-esteem. So actually, things like procrastination is an attempt often to protect our ego. And the truth is, creating these obstacles for ourselves unconsciously actually gives us a built-in excuse for future, failures or disappointments, which then actually protects our ego and our self-esteem because it's not our intrinsic ability, which means we've fallen short. It's actually, well, I didn't try that hard, or yeah, I kind of procrastinated and left it to the last minute. I could have done really well, but I just kind of created this robot for myself and oh well. And this attempt to protect our ego prevents us from learning from our mistakes or our shortcomings and as well growing as students, as people, being like, I came up short this time, but I learned from it and I figured out what I need to do. That's what growth is. So what's the answer then? How do we detach our sense of self-worth from our academic performance while still holding ourselves to that high standard and achieving the really great things we want to achieve? So firstly, it's really important to acknowledge that doing well in school and our studies does not make you a better person at all. And there's so many ways, especially in this modern world, how you can achieve success, happiness, financial, wealth that doesn't involve, going through college, getting straight A's. There's the internet now where people are making tons of money by streaming, making YouTube videos, whatever it is. And there's plenty of careers which don't require further education at all. And you can earn a very, very good living for yourself. I also think it's really important to diversify the sources from which we get our self-worth. So having multiple things on the go that can give you that little bit of an ego boost to make you feel confident in I am a competent person. I've got lots of things that are of worth to the world and people around me. So, whether that's playing a sport, volunteering in your community, being a good friend and having an active social life, being a good family member and looking after your family. And these things help to give us a sense of perspective, because we realize that, well, studying is only one part of my life and I've got all these other things going on. And then if we, do well in these other things that we've got in our life, that gives us a little confidence boost, which we can then transfer that over to our studies. Because if we've proven, well, I can do this to a high standard, well, there's no reason I can't perform academically to a high standard. So it helps in that way. And also, it's important to make your sense of self-worth unconditional. So don't tie it to, well, I did really well in school today, or I performed well in a test. Things that are more sustainable ways of making yourself feel emotionally balanced and happy is through valuing internal virtues, which are not dependent on measures set by the outside world. It's all internally. It's your own internal locus of control and things that are important to you. And whether, am I being a good person? Am I being a good family member? Am I making a difference to the lives of others around me? Am I being considerate? These are things which are better long term for you to base your self-esteem on. And finally, and this is a key takeaway from this video, if you are someone who identifies with being, having that high academic contingent self-worth, be really aware, try and be really aware of your unconscious processes while you're studying, and don't let them undermine you or shake you off course. If you get a disappointing score, feel that pain, but just also notice the urge to get defensive if your teacher's trying to give you feedback or critique your work, and acknowledge that, yeah, maybe that's my hurt child kind of wanting to push this away and not look at what I need to look at, and then step into a more adult, more mature mindset and be like, you know what, I'm disappointed in this grade, it stings a little bit, but there's actually an opportunity for me to learn from this setback and figure out what I need to do to improve. And if I just apply those learnings, then next time I'm going to do way better. Acknowledge that failure is a great opportunity for learning and future success, and then watch how much easier it is to do the work that's necessary for you to fulfill your potential while you're feeling good about yourself. But yeah, that's all from me today, guys. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one.